Welcome to the Social Workers radio talk show on WCDB Albany 90.9 FM with co-hosts Dr. Eric Hardiman and Alyssa Lotmore. Here at the Social Workers, we address issues important to our communities with social work students, alumni, and community partners as our guests.
As part of the University at Albany School of Social Welfare, we hope to take social work beyond the classroom and agency settings and directly to the public, because the public is the client. Catch us on air, online, and anytime. Welcome to the Social Workers Radio Talk Show. I'm your co-host, Alyssa Lotmore. Unfortunately, Dr. Eric Hardiman couldn't be with us today. But we're joined by Dr. Keli Rugenstein, who is an alum and a licensed clinical social worker, and also the executive director of Eastern Door Counseling Center. She has been in private practice for over 20 years in the Capital Region. Keli has focused her practice over the years in family estrangement and is a clergy and congregation consultant. She has partnered with Fe Anam Avis, the author of Peak, Parents of Estranged Adult Kids, a resource for recovery. Together, they have run online groups for this group of people over the year. The focus on parents who are estranged is because they are the largest group of our population to be affected by this growing phenomenon. She has authored the book, Relationsnip, Is There Life After Your Adult Child Rejects You? Its anticipated release is later this June. In it, she explores the many facets of our estrangement, but more importantly, recovery from the many impacts of estrangement. Welcome, Keli.
Hi.
I'm so glad to have you because this topic is not one we usually talk about. I mean, we've heard about, of parents who don't have children that talk to them or aren't really involved in their lives anymore, but we don't really talk about it from a research perspective or is there even a name for that? So I'm really glad to have you on the show.
Yeah, it's good to be here. It is a new phenomenon and it is very difficult to understand.
So let's just start off a little bit of a background. You are a social worker, you're an alum, you got your doctorate here at the university, and talk a little bit about how you got into this area, because it was students. Many people don't go in as a student saying, I want to focus on estrangement. Like, how did you get into this topic area and how did your background in social work play a role?
My background in social work played a role because I'm doing therapy for families and individuals and couples. And so I started to notice this pattern of estrangement, but it didn't strike me as a pattern at first. And then I was having a conversation with a friend of mine, Fe Anam Avis, who wrote the book Peak. And he told me about his book. I didn't realize that he had written the book. And we had this great conversation. And as we were talking, past clients were just popping into my head where there were so many cases of estrangement. And so as he came from a different background than I did. He's a pastor and he saw a lot of it in his churches. Then he experienced it himself. And with my background, with the clinical end, he was, excited to hear what I could offer him as information. And we just sort of took off from there.
No, it's something that, like I said, more people need to talk about this. So how did you end up going from there where you're talking about this, having conversations, to then have it being your area of focus where you're writing about it? How did that transition?
Faye asked me if I would, or maybe I asked him, I can't even remember, could sit in on online groups he was doing during COVID. And so I joined one of the groups. And it was just a natural fit for me as a family therapist to see these adults who were so broken by this relationship in their life having just sort of dissolved or been snatched away. And so with the work I had already done, and I just started putting the puzzle pieces together and hearing all of these people who were genuinely focused only on the estrangement. I just could not stay away from it. And it made a lot of sense when I look back on my work that people weren't talking about it. They were ashamed of it. They were isolating. And so understanding that the pain was so great that they just weren't even talking about it really made me decide that it needed more attention than it was getting.
Now, you mentioned in your bio that parents estranged by their children is the largest group of people affected by this phenomenon. And I'd like you to talk about, what are other groups affected by this and a little bit of the background on that.
So we focus on, Fe and I focus on parents who have been estranged by adult kids. But there's really four groups. There's parents who have been estranged by their adult kids, and then those kids who have been estranged by their parents, and then they're each in the seat of being estranged, but they're also both in the seat in the other groups of being the estranger. So there's four groups, but the biggest group is parents who have been estranged by their kids. 95% of the estrangements between parents and their adult kids are initiated by the adult child. So it's a very big population, and it's very rare that parents estrange their kids at all. So there's a big difference in those two groups.
And I'm assuming there's a lot of different reasons. I mean, for that sort of the causes or the lead up to this or the build up to saying, oh, I'm not speaking with my parent anymore, or I'm going to have limited contact. Are there certain, I'm assuming it's all different, but are there certain trends or characteristics or things that a history of something that had happened is a cause of this or plays a role?
Well, we could look at individual circumstances and be able to hear each other's stories, and it helps to take a step back and look at the bigger picture. So where somebody might say, excuse me, it helps us to take a step back because somebody may say, I just couldn't stand living with my parents or dealing with my parents any longer because their religion and their expectations of me are not within my value system. But taking the step back, we can say on a broader sense that a difference in values, regardless if it's religion or politics or marriage or gender issues, they're all values. So that is one set of factors. But there's also mental health issues. There are cultural issues that can come into play with estrangement, and what I call third-party issues. There are a lot of factors, but those are the main ones. And third parties are interesting in this whole spectrum because there are third parties that are affected, like I mentioned, the four groups of parents and kids, but many times there are third parties who are affected. So for example, one kid says to the other, well, if you're going to talk to mom and dad, then I'm not talking to you either. So you get a third party who's affected. But also on this other question you've just asked about, what influences this, third parties can also influence it. So somebody marries somebody who, say, is an emotional abuser and separates them from their family. You can also have, sadly, therapists who unwittingly become a third party in the estrangement dance. So third parties are sadly another big factor in the estrangement process.
It seems like there's a lot of different causes, but the impact, I mean, to have someone in your life, like a parent-child relationship, and then to have that kind of be cut and severed, it seems like there would be a lot to process with that. So is there, I mean, I know you mentioned the difference. It's not always reconciliation, but there's a recovery process, how to handle that and process that. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Sure. The recovery process is different from reconciliation. When we think of reconciliation, we think of coming back together and things are okay. And so I'll take a little sidestep to that. There is what we call the estrangement reconciliation dance. And that is where this pattern continues over time, where we're estranged, now we're back together. We're estranged, now we're talking again. And I don't like to use the word reconciliation in that situation. To me, it's reunification. Nothing has changed. I'm willing to talk to you again. So I try to differentiate between that reunification and the dance and true reconciliation. The sad part about reconciliation is that it is rare. A true reconciliation where two parties come together, understand what in the world happened, what went wrong, and are able to own that and allow the other person to have their narrative and then move forward again in relationship. More likely is, well, the pattern is estrangement and then a reunification. And then each time that happens, the distance between those two things grows bigger and deeper. And when I say deeper, what I mean is we can go from functional estrangement to what I call radical estrangement. Some people call it zero contact. So functional estrangement on the one end of the spectrum is I'll go to the family reunion, but don't talk to us while we're there, and I'm not talking to you. Functional estrangement, I won't hold your grandchildren from you, but I'm just going to drop them off at your house and they're going to go in and I'm not talking to you. All the way up to radical estrangement, which is zero contact. Don't write me, don't call me, don't respond to Facebook on anything I post. Don't try to use the kids to get to me, nothing. And that is probably the most painful that I have seen is the radical estrangement. So the difference is drastic. It's happening to people from the age of 55-ish up. On the lower end, 55, 1 in 8 parents are in an estrangement situation. The closer you get to 70, 75, that number begins to get to 1 out of every 2 parents is dealing with an estrangement.
And like you said, it could be at different levels. It could just be the less contact. I'm not really talking to you, but I'm still involved. You still know what I'm doing. You still have access to the grandkids, things like that, to the no contact. So that's a range, that statistic.
Well, and yes, it is. And the older the parent gets, the more likely it is to be a radical estrangement.
And I'm assuming that's because of the multiple attempts, as you mentioned, that every time there's a reunification and if something goes awry and it goes back to the estrangement type, yes, it builds and builds to functional to radical.
It does. And so the estrangement it gets worse because there isn't anyone out there helping parents to understand that there is a process they can go through that will help them with recovery, that will also help with reconciliation should you get that opportunity. And so if you keep making the same mistake over and over, the child just is so hurt and so distant from you that it becomes pretty close to impossible at times.
I mean, I can totally, I've seen this, I never knew there was types of names for it, the functional versus radical. But you've seen it sometimes when, especially if there's a mental health type of issue, it's something not even as simple as, not simple, but anxiety or depression. As individuals are going through that process, if they don't have the correct supports to make changes or address those types of issues in their own lives, it's hard to, you're balancing multiple things. You're balancing a relationship with your child, which you're trying to improve, but also your own mental health needs or whatever else it is going on in your life. Trying to navigate that without any support or guidance is can be challenging.
And there's a couple of different things that you mentioned in there. One of them that is really worth talking about are the impacts, but as well, the recovery process is very staged. I mean, we know that the first stage, we call it the sounding stage, is like, wow, what just happened to me? The next stage is exploration. We try to figure out, what is parental estrangement? I've just learned what this word is. What does it mean? Then, there's, what have I got next? There's the soundings, and then there's the exploration, and then there's the mitigation stage. And that's where we're trying to make ourselves feel better. What can we do to help that smooth things out? But really what we have to end up getting into is the stage where we recognize that there are vast differences between us. We both played a role in this, whatever that role is, and that we need to, if we are going to have any hope of reconciliation as parents, we need to be able to embrace those differences that are there, as well as work those through with our children. So there's a lot of work that can be done, and that end of it, as well as we need to look at the impacts, because they are myriad.
And I'm assuming this has an impact on the whole family. I mean, I'm an only child, but if I did have a brother or a sister and someone stopped talking to my mother, that has a ripple effect on the whole entire family. So does your research focus on that as well, and how it impacts other individuals in the family unit?
It does. And I'm glad you mentioned research, because my research is really just preliminary. It's just looking at the teeny tiny amount of research that's out there. This is not a well-researched topic, and it really deserves a lot more attention. But the impact on families does have a ripple effect. Sometimes there's no more family reunions, or there's one family unit that just never shows up anymore because, well, if they're going to go, I'm not going. And then everybody's got that same approach to it. Siblings sometimes who were not really estranged at all become estranged because one of them is saying, well, look, you need to take a side, and they don't want to take a side. So yeah, there is. And, even aunts, uncles, and grandparents have been given the same ultimatum. If you're going to talk to so-and-so, then I'm not going to be in relationship with you. And so, yes, and I do come from a Bowen systems perspective. So I do see that ripple effect. And we do also know from the little bit of research that's out there that this is an intergenerational way of binding anxiety in families.
So you were talking about your preliminary research. Talk a little bit about your book and what you incorporated into that book. Again, it's called Relationsnip: Is There Life After Your Adult Child Rejects You? Talk a little bit about that process, what you included in it, and like what our readers can expect to find in it.
So in the book, I go everywhere from the beginning of just defining what estrangement is and what it involves, through the impacts, because parents don't realize until I do a trauma timeline with them, they don't realize, and I can talk a little bit more about that, all the way through to what can clergy, therapists, estate planners, what do they need to know in order to help with this sort of phenomenon? In the middle of those two ends of the book, I talk about coming out of isolation, what the ideal family, and I say ideal with air quotes, looks like, and how do we change that? Getting out of isolation and the myths that surround this phenomenon. One of the most popular myths out there is if your adult child has estranged you, you must have done something wrong. And in fact, it's really a product of the dynamic between the two people. And Bowen systems theory speaks to that very clearly. As a matter of fact, it's the only theory that I'm aware of that actually has one of its legs is cut off, which is basically is estrangement. And so understanding the dynamic in the family is really important, and where does it come from? And I talk about the impacts. Some people don't even realize that what they're dealing with is a result of the trauma.
Well, I think that's a huge part of it, the trauma. I mean, sometimes we just will say, oh, that individual doesn't talk to their parent, or that parent's children don't talk to them anymore, or they moved away, there's limited contact, but we don't really focus on the trauma. I mean, I've heard that talked about in general. It's just sort of said in passing, oh yeah, they don't talk anymore, or something like that. But the trauma that is attached to that, where you have this bond with someone and now that is cut, that must play a huge role in health, mental health, emotional health for the individuals going through this.
It does. And I've seen probably, 10 or 20 different ways that people go through estrangement. Sometimes it's a gradual pulling away. They live further away. They call less and less. And there's just this gradual breakup. And the parent is just beside themselves, but they've lived into it in such a gradual way that they have become accustomed to it. And then there is the breakup on the other end, which I see frequently, and it's very explosive. And I call it a proving event. There's one researcher out there who calls it the catalyst event. But in my experience, I call it the proving event. And so the difference that I see is there isn't this like one thing happened, we had this explosion, and we're never going to get back together again as a family. I see the history of this as this has been building in a relationship over years. There's been little to no conversation. Most parents, when they have this experience that I'll describe, are shocked. They have no clue that their child was this unhappy or had interpreted certain things in their life in a negative light. So there's this moment where the child almost stages it at times. Not consciously, I don't believe. I think it's just there's this buildup and there's an explosion. And that gives the child something very concrete to look back at and say, see, that's exactly what I'm talking about. That's how you are. That was the last straw. So I don't necessarily see that as a catalyst because I believe that the ingredients were there all along. I see it as a proving event. And that is the part that can really be traumatic for the parent. And I have seen literally letters written to parents that were very harsh, very traumatic, very blaming. And at the very end, in a number of these, people have said, and if you reach out to me or come to my house, I will call the police on you. And parents that's just the rattling of the cage for them. They're just shook.
And you mentioned that sometimes the parents were shocked. And I'm going back to thinking of, and I just want to clarify, sometimes when like a kid might move across the country, there are parents in New York, the kid might move to California and they call less, maybe they skipped Christmas one year, very, minimum contact, but there was no ever real conversation. Maybe
Right.
the child was having some issues where they were like, I'm really frustrated with X, Y, and Z from my parent. This is not okay. But they never had that conversation, perhaps. And is that how sometimes things start, where it's the child removes themselves in some way, shape, or form, less contact, but without that conversation? And then maybe when the parent does call, the parent saying things that could aggravate the child, because the child's like, oh, this is why I don't talk to them, but they don't verbalize it. Is that sometimes an issue where the communication is so fractured that there's not an understanding of that this is an issue, or as serious of an issue as it is for the child, that the parent's not seeing that?
Yes, very much so. And what I will say about that situation, as well as even if it's a radical breakup, is that there is no co-created narrative. It's this is my story and that's your story, and they do not mesh at all. The little bit of research that is out there tells us it's fascinating. If you ask a group of adult kids who have estranged their parents, have you told your parents why you have estranged them? 66% of them will say, yes, I have told them. I have been very clear. If you ask a bunch of estranged parents, has your child explained to you why they have estranged themselves from you? 67% will say no. So that lack of a co-created narrative, a lack of me trying to understand you and you trying to understand me, is really obvious when you look at some of those statistics.
I have so many examples going through my head of similar situations where I know that communication, just with people I interact with, that communication is not there, and that the one individual isn't understanding the gravity of the situation, or think that they're helping, or thinks that their opinion, I'm just going to keep giving this opinion, and aren't realizing how much that is pushing the other person away.
Yes.
And so what is the solution for that? Not the solution, but let's say you're a parent or a child. Is it talking one-on-one? If you feel like it's not getting through, is it bringing a counselor in or a therapist to help with that? If you're seeing these or having these feelings, or feel like your child's pulling away, or the child's like, I'm not as close to my parent as I want to be, and I'm pulling away. What are some initial steps to avoid this estrangement phase, to getting to that level?
Yeah, if you want to avoid getting to that level, it's really helpful to go to some family therapy and figure out, what is this dance that we're doing? I'm not a bad person, you're not a bad person, but boy, together our dynamic is explosive. And having a third party who has no skin in the game, only the desire to help with family's health functioning, is a really good step. If that doesn't help and you do become estranged, there are not many groups out there. Fe and I cannot keep up with the number of emails we get in a week, and people who want groups. We've been doing groups online for over a year. We cannot keep up. We just can't humanly keep up with the amount of hurt and pain that's out there. We get groups of 10 to 12 at a time, and we run our groups for 10 to 12 weeks at a time. And we have one other person who has come on as a group leader. We can't keep up, but it's helpful. The people who go to these groups really report back to us as very helpful for them in their attempt at recovery. So part of our mission is to expose this and help train therapists on this, and help them and to bring some leaders up in sort of some self-help group styles, so that we can have peak groups all around the country. It's a grand picture, but we'd like to go there.
And I might have missed this. Are your groups in person or via Zoom to reach a larger audience?
Yeah, we're doing them on Zoom, and we've had them all across the country from the East Coast to the West Coast. The last one that I just finished was being held on Wednesday evenings at 7 so that East and West Coast could be involved in it.
And for those interested, what is the best way to find out more about the groups or contact information? I'm just curious in case anyone is
We
interested in
have,
attending.
yeah, we have a website, parents of Estranged Adult Kids.com. So it's very easy to find that. And there's the information is there as far as what we're doing. Right now, we have waiting list because we can't run too many groups at the same time because we both are doing other things and trying to get peak going. And the difficulty for a lot of people in this is they don't have a good support system. There's the myths that you must be a faulty parent, and there's people, you know, you can only tell this story so many times to somebody before they just don't want to hear it again. It's really difficult. And then the parents get aging and they need to do legal end of life things and estate planning, and they don't have a support system. They don't have their kids to guide them on that. They don't know, should I put them in the will? Should I leave them out? It's just a real kettle of fish when it comes to figuring out how to deal with this and so many different disciplines.
And this is not a topic that I've seen, at least on when I get emails from organizations that focus on aging, and they have different topics about how to like create your will or how to, you know, navigate the internet or an iPad. I don't see topics like this.
No, you're not going to. We've even approached AARP and we're not able to get much response from them to say, this is an important topic that you need to be educating people about, especially when it comes to end of life planning and elder care and health proxies. Lawyers will call us and say, you know, what is your best advice on what's the outcome going to be for this family? I even have a chapter in my book on that. Your last will and testament.
Well, it's needed. And again, for our listeners, the title of the book is Relationsnip: Is There Life After Your Adult Child Rejects You? Well, I'm glad your book is covering a lot of these topics because, like you said, you can't really find discussions about this or workshops or panels because it's really no one's talking about it. So I'm glad that the book of both you and Fe have created books and that you're doing these groups to help people have some sort of resource or means to, hey, there's trauma here. I don't know what to do. I'm hurting and probably scared too, because you don't know what to do. And you need to have resources or some kind of guidance in some way, shape, or form to help you navigate.
Yes.
So let's say someone's listening and they're the child that's listening, or a brother or a sister. Mm-hmm. What steps do you have for them? I mean, we talked a little bit about the parents and they're going to trying to get into the groups that you have, or they might read your book. What about the kids or the siblings who are struggling with this? Are there more resources, or is your book something that could be a resource for them? What are their options if they're struggling that they don't have their parent in their life? Because I mean, even if there is an estrangement and it was their choice, it's not easy to say, hey, I don't talk to my mom anymore. I don't have a relationship with my dad, or now my brother and sister are frustrated with me, or because I'm not talking to mom and dad and they don't see why. What supports are there for them?
There are not a lot, although there are some online. I'm very saddened by many of the ones I find online because they want to be taking sides, and there's a lot of the vitriol that goes on. And really, again, it's the dynamic. It's nobody has a baby and looks at that little baby the day they take them home and says, oh, I am just going to be the absolutely worst parent for you. They say we all want to be the best parent. We all try our best and we all fall short of being perfect. That's very true. And the kids are just as sad. Nobody wants to walk around and say, I have a parent, but I can't even stand to talk to them. That's a really sad thing for them as well. And the groups, they're just as difficult for them as it is for their parents to find the support they need. We need a lot of work in this area. Social work could do so much in this area, research and preparing people to do the work. I'm doing training courses at different colleges, different social welfare colleges around the United States for like an added thing for their students so they can learn about this population. So anything we can do to help prepare social workers and therapists is important.
You had said something, and I want to just circle back on that, no one looks at their baby and it's like, I'm going to be a bad parent. And it's not that they probably aren't a bad parent. I mean, there's some individual cases, but sometimes it could be a different of personality or values, like you said. And do you think that's why sometimes there's not that counseling or bringing somebody else in, because there's a level of possible shame of, oh my gosh, my child and I are going back and forth.
Mm-hmm.
We can handle it on our own inside. We don't have to let other people know. Is there any of that, or do you feel as we've progressed, more open to letting people know about what's going on in the family, inside the family unit?
You know what I call this? I call this the new taboo, because they don't want to talk about it. There is such shame around this. And it's just, the fascinating part is you could have numbers of children and they don't all estrange you. And now let me be really clear. I am not talking about parents who have been abusive, who are substance abusers, who have abandoned their family. That subset of parents who have been estranged are not included in the research. Those are expected and unsurprising estrangements. So that population that we are talking about are just who you just mentioned. They're parents who've tried their best, thought they were doing the very best that they could for their children, and have not been able to bridge that gap.
And in the age of social media, where everyone, I look at my mom's Facebook page, sometimes everyone has pictures of their grandkids and going here and there. I think that adds to a level of trauma at times, because you are now feeling disconnected. You might start not going out and interacting with individuals anymore because you don't want to have to explain this. Why aren't you posting pictures of your grandkid and making up excuses or things like that? I'm assuming social media only makes this more complex.
More complex, and it adds to the level of isolation, because going to a social event where everybody's sitting around saying, oh, guess what my 3-year-old did? Guess what our 18-year-old did? Oh, guess who just got married? And you can't share any news other than, I don't know, because we don't talk. And so there's that level of isolation that keeps people withdrawn, and that social support, again, that social support system starts to fall apart.
Well, this is a topic that hopefully, I'm glad you're coming on talking about this on our show, but I'm hoping that it gets more attention, because it is something that I feel, like you said, I never knew is there like a name for it? Are other people going through this? You kind of just hear, oh, that person, their kid doesn't talk to them right now. I don't know why. And then people have their own opinions about why, and everyone gets involved. It's just, you know how it is, which it might be another reason for the isolation, because people don't want judgment that's based on nothing.
Exactly.
But it's a topic that needs to be discussed, and there needs to be resources for both, not just both, the parent, the child, and then the whole family unit, because the family's breaking apart and everyone is impacted by this.
True.
So for our listeners, again, the book is titled Relationsnip: Is There Life After Your Adult Child Rejects You? And Kelly, is it available online? Where can people find this book?
It will be available in June. I don't have an exact date yet for the release. And initially, it's going to be at parentsofestrangedadultkids.com, and then eventually on Amazon.
Okay, perfect. And if individuals want more information about your groups they just go to the website, or is it the contact information all on the website for individuals to find out more information, or if they have questions or resources? Is the website the best way?
The website's a good way, but we do have a YouTube channel. And the YouTube, we've got a number of videos up. A set of them is just, I'm reading Fe's book, so people who can't afford the book can listen to it. But then there are many other videos about different facets of estrangement that I try to add to every week. And so that's probably the best place to learn about estrangement.
Very good. And what's the YouTube channel? How can they find that? Is it linked on the website?
It is, and you can go to YouTube and just search Parents of Estranged Adult Kids, and it will show up.
You picked the easiest website name. I'm sorry. It's like perfect. It's exactly what I'm searching for. That's it. So
yes.
Kelly, I want to thank you for coming on and sharing this information. Again, an important topic. I'm so glad you reached out because, like you said, it's not something that's discussed. The research is very slim, and there needs to be more research and resources because this is a huge population of people that we're talking about that are impacted by this. And I feel like with our society so polarized as it is, that just adds to it, disagreements and different values and how you think things should be, and it pulls people away. So this is a very important topic, and hopefully the numbers won't be growing, but I feel like the numbers might be increasing a little bit. So
yes,
people like you are needed who are experts in this area.
Oh, well, thank you for having me. I really appreciate the opportunity to sort of share this with anybody who's willing to listen and to try to understand that it's a really big issue for us today, and we need to look at it.
And again, we were joined today with Dr. Keli Rugenstein, who is a licensed clinical social worker, an alum of UAlbany, and is the executive director of Eastern Door Counseling Center. The new book, which will be out in June, is titled Relationsnip: Is There Life After Your Adult Child Rejects You? And that will be available on their website and via Amazon at a later date. Thank you so much, Kelly.
Thank you.